Hello and welcome to our webinar on all about the 2018 Mac Mini at MacStadium. Thank you all for taking the time to attend. My name's Sean Langton and I'll be speaking with you guys for the next 20 or 30 minutes. The plan here is to go through a little bit about the history of the Mac Mini, the ways that it's used, how we rack it at MacStadium, and then all about the new Mac Mini that Apple has just announced, and some details of how that will work for the use cases that we've been seeing. We're going to go ahead and get started right now. Please feel free to type any questions in as we go along, and we'll make sure to answer some of those questions at the end of the presentation. So let's get started. What is the Mac Mini? Well, initially it was launched as a starter Mac for PC switchers. Steve Jobs introduced it along with a new acronym, which was BYOKDM, which was Bring Your Own Keyboard, Display, and Mouse. Really, it was intended for somebody to unplug the ugly PC tower that they had under their desk or on top of it and replace it with a sleek little Mac Mini device. Well, what happened with that? Turns out that Apple people can be very creative. So almost from the start, these things were being built into rack-mountable servers, robots, DJs and artists were packing them up to take them with them on site to events. And it's actually a pretty cool multi-use computer. And this is perhaps what drove MacStadium in the early days, is really why we exist. One of the creative uses was storing them in data centers and then allowing our customers to have all kinds of creative uses after that. We got started to make Mac Minis available to anybody who wanted them. We built our team, facilities, and infrastructure to service some of the biggest companies in the world, and we're committed to providing that same level of security and performance to all of our customers, whether they're individuals or large companies looking for scalable Mac infrastructure. The high standards of service that we have mean that we really invest in security, performance, and making sure that our customers have a good experience. I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about how we rack Mac Minis. First of all, let's start with security. So we take this very, very seriously. We don't know what our customers store on the minis that we host, but we expect that it's important. We have invested a ton of time and money in making sure that all of our processes are secured all the way up and down the line. We've been audited by some top tier security firms and have achieved all of the big compliance standards. So for those of you who follow this sort of thing, ISO 27001, SOC 1 and 2, Type 1 and 2, if those numbers don't mean anything to you, you can rest easy knowing that those are the same sorts of certifications that AWS, Azure, Google Cloud have. And it really is the top of the line. We also host all of our equipment in data center partners that themselves maintain all of these security certifications, and they have all of the bells and whistles that you might expect: locks, security guards, cameras, biometrics, man traps, the whole deal. When it comes to reliability, those same data center partners, along with our redundant infrastructure and redundant routes to the internet, mean that we can support 99.999% uptime on power and network availability, which is, again, industry, top of the industry levels of reliability, which means that it's always there when you need it, whether it's a Mac Mini hosting some old photos or whether it's mission critical business infrastructure. From a performance perspective, we make sure that we have high levels of network connectivity, that we have really reliable power, which helps the machines operate at their peak, and we have a lot of data center level cooling that helps make sure that the Macs never reach thermal throttling, makes sure that you have the best performance on all of your equipment. From a support perspective, we have trained engineers and trained CSTs that only do Macs. So all day, every day, it's Mac infrastructure, which means we know all of the idiosyncrasies, all of the ins and outs related to that particular platform, which, as we all know, can be great for lots of things, but can be quirky in certain ways. We have 24/7 support with remote hands in all of our data centers, which means that at any time, day or night, if you need somebody to go push the power button for you or help you figure out what's wrong, we can be there to help. We design all of our racks so that they can support peripherals, whether that's SAN storage, USBs, or graphics interfaces that help make sure you get the most out of your GPUs. It's an extra step that we add to make sure that we can attach those to any computers that we host. We have data centers around the world. We have 2 in Europe, 3 in the United States, that mean that you can get a Mac that's close to you from a ping perspective. It also means that you can have Macs in multiple locations if you really want to protect yourself from any kind of disasters from a backup perspective. And finally, expertise. So in addition to having all of our trained customer support technicians, all of our data center engineers understand Macs. We've designed the entire system from the ground up to support this unique hardware type. It's not a side business as part of a larger business that we do. We are all Macs all the time, and that comes through in the way that we think about this. We're very careful, and I'll share some of that with you as we get into the way that we've designed the racks for the 2018 minis. Before we get into that, though, I wanted to just spend a minute and talk about how our customers use the Mini. There's really 2 groups. There's personal uses, and there's enterprise or startup uses, more like a company use case. And I'll talk about each because I think they're all really interesting. We have thousands and thousands of Mac Minis deployed. We have thousands of customers that use them. And this is really just a small snippet of the personal use cases that we've seen. We know that our customers can use the Minis as a web or a file server. They can, that can be to host a personal website or just to host backup files so that you have an offsite backup on your computer. While most websites on the world run on Linux machines, the Mac Mini is a great server for people who understand and are familiar with Mac OS. We also see people using the Macs as servers for Mac apps. FileMaker is a great example. These are apps where you can host them yourself, but you need a Mac to do so. This is sort of a similar use case as to folks who use it for remote desktops. So when our customers use the Mac as a remote desktop, this is a way for them to get access to a Mac OS operating system wherever they are. And actually, you can remote into that using an iOS device. So if you want to travel with just an iPad or even just an iPhone, but you want to have access to Mac OS software, that's a great way to do it. The hobby machine use case is for when you want to try out programs or operating systems without the risk of bricking your daily driver. We have people that will upload files and let the Mac render them. Mac has really awesome graphics performance. It has great fonts and other sort of graphical rendering tools that are built right into the operating system that make it perfect for this. And then the one that sort of spans from personal use to business use is as a build server. And this is one where you upload your source code, and then Xcode, which is Apple's proprietary compiler, will compile those codes into an executable. And if you're working on for personal use, if you're working on a laptop that may not have all the power in the world, you don't want it to heat up in your lap, you can send that source code out to a remote build server and have it build for you, and then just send you back the finished executable. Now, that dovetails into the enterprise and startup use case world because a lot of large companies will actually use the Mac Mini as a node in a build farm. So really they'll have all of their developers working simultaneously, and every time somebody finishes working on a piece of the program, it'll get compiled, and you definitely want to have that happening offsite because those machines are going to be running compiles basically all day, every day. And we've published some of these use cases on our website, but companies like Shopify and Pandora are using Mac Minis to drive a lot of their builds for their development team. These can be deployed as cloud build nodes using virtualization technologies like Anka or VMware or KVM, or they can be deployed as bare metal technologies. So Buck is a tool that Facebook designed that helps automate bare metal builds on Mac Minis. We've also seen lots of customers use different kinds of DIY automation with NetBoot and other technologies. Another big enterprise use case is for cross-browser or cross-platform browser testing. So the browser testing companies will need to make sure that a website looks good on every browser, from Chrome to Edge to Firefox, including Safari. And Safari, as you may know, only runs on Mac OS. So if you want to test Safari, you need to have some Macs in there to run Safari and help render those websites on that browser. One of the great things about Mac infrastructure is that in addition to Mac OS, it can also support Windows or Linux. So really you can run every browser and every operating system on one Mac Mini. We also see customers using the Macs as image render nodes for larger enterprise use cases, again, for the same reason that individuals do. Great graphics support, great font support, and a lot of artistic tools are built right in to work with Mac OS. So that's a little bit about the Mac Mini, about how we think about using them at MacStadium. But we're here to talk about 2018. So what happened in 2018 that led us all to dial into this webinar? Well, the Mac Mini got an update. So this is Tom Bodger on stage at the Brooklyn Academy of Music. And we called out, my favorite line from the presentation. They actually put a picture of our data center racks on the big screen. It said MacStadium is the very definition of mission critical for the customers that depend on us. And we're so proud to have been called out on this stage. And it's, for us, a really a great validation of the work that we've been doing and the happy customers that we've been able to amass by providing the service. It also shows that Apple is really happy to have the help of companies like MacStadium in providing this to the customers. They know that customers need access to these Mac Minis and don't necessarily want to put them under their desk. We've been working on the Mac Mini forever, and so this was a great sort of a pinnacle. One of our executives, Brian Stuckey, has been in the Mac Mini world forever. He was actually invited to this presentation and was sitting in the audience, so he snapped this picture for us. So in addition to launching a new Mac Mini, something else changed. If you looked at the Apple website the day before the announcement, the Mac Mini was over here on the left with a white background, just like the iMac, the MacBook Air, and the MacBook. These are all of Apple's consumer-grade Macs. After the announcement, that Mini moved over here and joined the professional-grade Macs with the black background, the iMac Pro, the Mac Pro, and the MacBook Pro. So this is a move from consumer to pro and how Apple is thinking about the Mac Mini. You may have noticed a couple of other things. On the left-hand side where the Mini is brushed aluminum, it also has a starting price, $499, right? Meant to be cheap and friendly. The new Mac Mini, I think Apple realized, is not an entry-level Mac. It is designed to be a pro machine. It's more expensive, and they took the price right off of the ad for you there. So what do you actually get in the new Mac Mini? Well, you get 4 times more RAM. So it's got up to a 64 gig configuration. You've got 3 more cores than the Mini that was available in 2012, with a 6-core configuration being the max core count. And that's great for apps that have parallelization, or if you're going to actually run virtual machines on the Mac Mini and you want to have the ability to run multiple VMs on a single machine. All of that culminates in a 2x faster performance benchmark. So we'll talk about that in just a little bit, but this means that if you have, one of the benchmarks that we pay the most attention to is build times for our customers that are doing compile operations on the Mac Minis. And when you have a 2x faster performance benchmark, that means that your 40-minute build can now run in 20 minutes just by upgrading the hardware, which is amazing. And finally, it's 100% space gray, which I think we can all agree looks a lot cooler. if you are deploying those Mac Minis at MacStadium, you'll never see the space gray finish on that thing, but you can rest assured knowing that your Macs look awesome in our racks. This 2 times faster builds can't be overstated. This is for the 6-core configuration. Even the smaller configurations that we sell can be up to 33% faster. So these are the 3 Mac Minis that we've decided to rack in our data centers. And I'll get into why we chose this set for just a moment here. So these 3 Mac Minis offer a sort of a Goldilocks view of the starter Mac that we have, the quad-core i3 Mac Mini with 16 gigs of RAM is great for a lot of jobs. And like I said, this one is about 33% faster than previous Macs, previous Mac Minis anyway, which is a great little performance speed up, and we can offer this at a lower price. The mid-tier Mac Mini is a 6-core Mac Mini with 32 gigs of RAM, again, 512 of storage. So this is probably what most customers will want if they're doing a high performance workload. And then for the folks that really want to blow it out, we're also going to offer a 6-core Mac Mini with 64 gigs of RAM and a full terabyte of storage. Probably ideal if you have large VMs and you want to run, as many as you can on the machine. So in addition to faster performance, there's a few other factors that we have to take into consideration when racking these new Mac Minis. All that extra power comes at a cost. There's twice as much power consumption. There's twice as much heat output. The port I/O is 10 times faster, and all the ports moved and are in different places. So what does that mean for us? Well, we had to go back to the drawing board and design new custom rack mounts. So the racks that you've seen earlier in this presentation, if you've looked on our website, the ones that were shown in the Apple keynote event, we've custom designed those racks. They're about 10 feet tall, and they're designed to get optimal data center density for that 2012 and 2014 variety of Mac Mini. Now, the issue is that with the power consumption and the heat output, the I/O speed and the port configurations of the new Macs, they just wouldn't fit in there and get the right performance and the right level of serviceability that we want as a standard when we deploy things. So we actually went and designed all new racks. So these are designed, patent pending. We build them ourselves. And these have better power distribution to the minis to make sure that they have enough power to run optimally. They have blow-through cooling. So if you're familiar with data centers, there's a concept of hot aisle and cold aisle. The air is blown across the computers from the cold aisle into the hot aisle, and in the hot aisle, it's removed from the data center. So the original minis were designed as, quiet, easy to, sort of light duty machines, and they didn't really heat up, so you could pack them close together and it didn't matter. With these new machines pumping out a lot of heat, we had to actually do blow-through cooling. So the air is blown from the cold aisle across the Macs into the hot aisle where it's removed from the data center, which makes sure that the Macs never heat up to the point where you start seeing any thermal throttling. That makes sure you get optimal performance out of the Mac. We also updated our top of rack switching for all of the Mac Minis. This means that we can support the 1 gig Ethernet ports that are shipped by default, and also the 10 gig Ethernet ports on special request to get really the max transfer rates out of those Mac Minis, which is important for customers who want to deploy them in clouds. We also built a special tray for peripherals for some of the old school Mac Minis that we still rack. Again, because the Macs don't heat up that much, it's possible to strap a drive or some kind of peripheral right to the outside of the Mac and just hook it on with tape. But for these newer Macs, we want to keep all the surface clear for maximum heat dissipation. And that means that we had to build a special tray behind the Macs to hold the peripherals. And one of the other great things about this new rack that we've designed is that it will fit in a standard data center rack, not only the sort of 10-foot monsters that we use now. This means that we can deploy it in more of our data centers and will be easier to deploy in new data centers as we open more around the world. So I wanted to talk a little bit about peripherals for the Mac Mini as well. We deploy all of our 2018 minis with a GS HDMI adapter, and that creates basically, I'll just talk about this for a moment because it's interesting. If you have the Mac Mini sitting on your desk with no monitor plugged in, the GPU will detect that and basically throttle down. It says there's no driver, there's no monitor to drive, so I don't need to waste the GPU creating graphics. Well, that may or may not be true, and a lot of our customers depend on the GPU built into the Mac Mini. If you plug a dongle into the back of the Mac Mini that simulates a monitor, then the GPU will spin up and it helps improve performance for the machine. The HDMI adapter we ship with all of our legacy Mac Minis works great for this, and the GPUs that are in those minis can detect that there's a monitor and it works fine. The 2018 minis actually have several different performance modes for GPU. You've got your standard HDMI performance mode, you got your 4K HDMI performance mode, and they have a virtual reality 4K performance mode. And that's what that GS HDMI adapter does. So the Mac actually thinks that it's plugged into a super high resolution virtual reality display, which kicks the GPU into high gear. So if you look at the Geekbench GPU score, it's about 30,000. Now, that's a pretty decent score, but you should keep in mind that it really doesn't hold a candle to some of Apple's highest end video and graphics machines like the iMac Pro, which has a GPU score of 177,000, so almost 5 times faster, which is why we make sure that you get all the performance you can out of it with those HDMI adapters. So like I said, those come for free with every one of our 2018 minis. We also have shared SAN storage. So this is an awesome option for folks that have need for high encryption on external storage for redundancy. If information is really mission critical and you can't trust it on a USB drive or something like that, or if you have multiple Mac Minis with us and you want them all to look at the same storage volume. So these SAN arrays are in our data center, and we can actually partition an individual LUN of whatever size you need to use with your Macs. And finally, we have USB-C hard drives that plug into the Mac Mini. Great if you have one Mac Mini and you want to get just really cheap storage attached to it. So you can get up to 4 terabytes of storage, and it's pretty inexpensive because these are just standard USB hard drives that we can put in the racks right along with the minis. So there's another little wrinkle with the Mac Mini that I wanted to talk about. This is the T2 chip. And the T2 chip is gotten a lot of hype lately, and it's actually a really impressive piece of technology. So this is Apple designed silicon. So it's not an Intel chip, it's not a Qualcomm chip. This is actually Apple designs and has these made. And this chip is really designed as an SSD controller, but it has lots of cool features regarding security and everything else. I mean, the main thing from a performance perspective is that it is a great SSD controller. It can actually, we've got some of the speeds up here, but you can do sustained read out of an SSD in a Mac Mini at 2.8 to 3.1 gigabytes a second. That's super fast, and sustained writes, almost just as fast, kind of between 1 and 3 gigs a second. And this is because every operation addressing the SSD is run by this special dedicated chip, which optimizes the reads and writes, and it does all of that without taxing the CPU at all. So it can, it really improves performance that way. There's some goods and some bads with that. So in addition to the high-speed SSD writes, it also does encryption, quote, for free. And what that means is that because the CPU doesn't have to run any cycles to encrypt the data while it goes onto the drive, because all that encryption can be done on the T2 chip, it means that you get encryption without sacrificing any CPU performance. And from a security perspective, that's amazing. Encrypted data is always more secure than unencrypted data. It does pose some challenges, though. In addition to encrypting the data, it also has a feature called Secure Boot, which makes sure that no operating system can be loaded onto the Mac that's not been signed by Apple. Now, I suppose that's a good thing if you're worried that your grandma's computer is going to get accidentally loaded with a fake version of Mac OS that looks the same but steals her credit card number. For a lot of our customers and the use cases that we deploy, I wouldn't say that's as much of a concern. And it does limit a lot of features. So, for example, it blocks the ability to use NetBoot in the way that a lot of our customers have done in the past. It blocks the ability to load Windows or ESXi or Linux variants without doing some extra work. It blocks us from doing drive migrations with tools like SuperDuper or Carbon Copy Cloner, although our engineers have found a workaround that seems to be working pretty well. And the T2 chip also keeps an eye on all of the hardware that's in the machine and prevents you from doing upgrades. If the machine detects that an upgrade has been performed outside of an Apple store, basically an actual Apple facility, it can essentially brick the computer. I guess intended as a security feature, but hampers some of the flexibility that customers have. So, in addition to the T2 chip blocking some of this, Apple had made some decisions with the 2018 Mini that the storage would be soldered onto the motherboard, meaning it's not upgradable. The CPU is soldered onto the motherboard, meaning it's not upgradable. And while the RAM is technically upgradable, as in a human could do it, it's one of the most complicated in-field RAM updates that we've seen. You run a real risk of damaging the Mac while you do it. And as we said with the T2 chip, it's uncertain if in the future a RAM upgrade would actually leave the Mac inoperable. So we've made the decision that while it might be technically possible, we're not going to upgrade RAM on any devices in the field. Now that comes back to why we chose just 3 variants of the Mac Mini to support in our data centers. Given that they're not upgradable, we don't have as much flexibility as we had in the past to upgrade RAM, CPU, and storage, exactly to customer specifications. So really, it's going to be about switching between devices from the 4-core to the 6-core and then to the maxed out 6-core. So one other question that a lot of customers have is the cloud. So we have a lot of customers that will use free ESXi on the minis to build their own clouds, or will actually work with us to deploy large-scale, scalable Mac clouds built on Mac Mini, Mac Pro, or even iMac Pro hardware. Traditionally, there are 2 ways to deploy a cloud on a Mac. There's VMware, which has a software called ESXi, allows you to create VMs on the Mac, and particularly the Mac Mini and the Mac Pro. And there's a tool called Anka, which is designed by a company named Virtu. It's actually a relatively new tool, and it's built on Mac OS, which helps it work with some of Apple's latest operating systems and hardware features. Unlike ESXi, which doesn't really work anymore. In fact, ESXi lacks drivers for the SSD controller. So if you're using ESXi, you can't access the internal SSD drive at all. If you're using ESXi, you can't access the Thunderbolt 3 ports, which would allow you to attach high-speed external storage. And you can't access the 10 gigabit Ethernet port, which might also allow you to reach high-speed storage. So without that, you're kind of stuck. The best you can do is run ESXi and try to use USB 2.0 drives, but that's not really going to give you the performance that you need. So we're left with Anka. And Anka is a great option. It's a company, like I said, it's a tool that's from a company called Virtu that we've partnered with. So we can actually make this available to our customers in the form of Anka clouds. And Anka, because it's built on Mac OS, automatically works with the T2 chip, automatically works with Mac OS Mojave, and will load on the Mac Mini with no problem. So if you're interested in doing a lot more automation or getting more VMs per machine, more instances of your operating system than just one for every Mac Mini, having the ability to spin up and blow away VMs for individual jobs, definitely reach out. Our sales engineers can talk you through all of the ins and outs and help you understand if that's the right tool for building a cloud for your use case. So nearing the end here, I wanted to talk about the footprint for our Macs. So like I said, we have data centers all over the world, and right now these Mac Minis are available in Atlanta and Las Vegas. They'll be coming soon to Dublin, and shortly after that, we'll be rolling them out in our Silicon Valley location. Our Frankfurt data center is set to open in 2019 and should be able to support Mac Minis there as well. So finally, I'm sure that everyone's interested in pricing. For the quad-core i3 Mac Mini, we've set the price of that at only $150 a month, and we're really excited about this. It's a super powerful machine, and at that price, it's only about $30 more monthly than the previous most powerful Mac Mini, which was a quad-core from 2012. This machine is faster, it has more RAM, has more hard drive space, and that's a SSD drive, which means that you get those tremendous write speeds. So it's a really great way to get into the 2018 Mac Mini. The next step up is the 6-core with 32 gigs of RAM for $200 per month. And if you want to max it out and get 64 gigs of RAM with a full terabyte hard drive, that's $350 per month. And all of these come with a 24-hour trial, so you can get in, you can run your workload, see what your performance really is on the machines before making a decision. So that's it. Overall, we've got a much faster CPU on the machine. We've got more RAM, more SSD space. We've got faster network connections, more peripherals. It's cloud ready. And so if you've been thinking about upgrading your Mac Mini, now is a great time to get started. So with that, I will go through and look at some of the questions that our audience has submitted here and see if there's anything else that we can share. If you haven't typed a question in yet, feel free to go and type it right into the webinar control. There's a question and answer area. So questions are starting to come in. So some folks have asked why we picked the minis that we did. So as we said, because they are not necessarily upgradable in the field, we wanted to select ones that we thought would be an entry level, one that's going to be a workhorse machine for almost all high performance workloads, and then for the customers that need to really max it out because they want the fastest performance, so they have a workload that's particularly CPU bound or needs a ton of hard drive space. That's why we picked our max option. Someone asked if they want to upgrade the Mac, what happens? And so I guess that can mean two things. We have a lot of customers running 2012 and 2014 variety legacy Macs. And if customers want to upgrade from one of those Macs to a 2018 Mac, what's going to happen is we can make that 2018 Mac available, but because of the T2 chip and some of the limitations that provides, we can't automatically port the data or the settings over. We can make both of those available, and you can use whatever restore functions you typically would to move information from one to the other as part of that upgrade. We don't have sort of a grace period during that transition, but should be straightforward to do so during the 24-hour trial that we provide. Somebody asked if there's any word yet on ESXi or NetBoot compatibility with the 2018 Mac. So it's a great question. We've got some friends inside of Apple that have shared a few, call it guidelines or suggestions, insight into how they might be thinking about it. But in true Apple fashion, it's all off the record and a little mysterious anyway. So what we've heard is that Apple intends to eventually get ESXi compatibility and publish a workaround for NetBoot so that can be operational again. Frankly, we heard that a couple of months ago and haven't seen any progress on it. So everyone's guess would be as good as mine in terms of when that's going to actually be available. The good news is that it sounds like it's something that Apple is interested in doing, but of course, without timelines, it's hard to plan. I guess the follow-up question on upgrading Macs, what if I have a 2018 Mini, maybe a 4-core, and want to upgrade to a 6-core Mac Mini? It would be actually the same procedure as upgrading from a 2012 Mac Mini. We would make both available, and you would migrate however you can. So there are tools like Back to Mac, which will help you back up a Mac from one to the other. Imagine if you've got a new laptop, so that can move over settings and tools, but we can't just clone the drive because of the T2 chip and some of those limitations. Folks are asking about availability for the Macs now. So we have inventory in every data center, and we are placing orders every week with Apple to keep that inventory refreshed. For customers that are looking for larger deployments, 10, 20, 50, 100 Macs, talk to us and we can make sure that we get the exact right specs that you're looking for and catch you up on timeframes with those. Some folks are asking about operating systems that work with the Mac Mini. So at this point, the Mac Mini only will run macOS Mojave. Older versions of macOS are not supported on that Mac. And as I said before, the T2 chip has this secure boot feature, which can also prevent you from loading other operating systems. A lot of our customers will run Ubuntu or Windows on the machines. So we've actually been able to load Windows using Boot Camp, but it doesn't just install with an ISO the way that it used to. Same thing goes for certain versions of Linux. It's possible, but it is a trickier install than it was previously. And then regarding, so actually all of those operating systems can be run using virtualization. So if you want to work with, if you want to actually build a cloud, you can virtualize any operating system on top of the Mac, no problem, but actually installing it as the base OS, is problematic at this point. There's a question on co-location. We are happy to co-locate 2018 Mac Minis in our new racks. In fact, we had, even before we had announced the new racks or launched the new Mac Minis, we actually started receiving 2018 Mac Minis from some of our customers that have been co-locating with us for years. So those prices are available on our website. I think that is most of the questions at this point. So if you have other questions, of course, you can always reach out to MacStadium, hello@MacStadium or sales@MacStadium.com. We have a live chat on our website where you can get connected to our sales engineers or our customer support technicians 24/7. And, of course, there's lots of more information on our website as well. Very eager to hear from you guys, and thank you so much for your attention today.